Every techno kick, whether it's a rumble kick, a trance kick, a distorted kick, or an industrial techno kick, have the same thing in common that makes them solid and strong. Without that thing, all the power gets lost. In this tutorial, I will teach you a single technique you can apply to all your techno projects to improve your production's quality overnight. It all begins with volume. As a beginner producer, you should be already familiar with a peak volume term. This is the highest amplitude value in any signal. Ableton volume meters display that peak value so you can, for example, stay below the 0 decibel ceiling, for which every mastering engineer will be grateful. In this project, I have all the kicks you have heard in the intro. On each of both weak and strong kick sounds, I have used utility to match their peak volume levels. Let's compare the kick sounds against each other. Listen closely and try to spot the differences. Whether your conclusion was that these stronger kick sounds seem to you louder, more glued, or more flat, you are correct in all cases. All these terms relate to, again, volume, but now let's talk about something different than peak volume. This is the same waveform I used to define what the peak volume is. A second term that is related to volume is the dynamic range. Technically speaking, it's the ratio between the smallest and largest possible values of a changeable quality. Let's simplify that and say the dynamic range is a difference in volume between the loudest and quietest parts of the sound. These parts are very easy to spot. Now we can highlight the dynamic range more or less accurately. We are looking now at the waveform of a kick drum before using that mighty technique I will teach you soon. What about the processed kick drum? Here we can see the dynamic range is smaller. That is why all the kick drums after processing seemed louder, more glued or more flat. Another way to observe the dynamic range is to use an average volume meter like a VU meter. Such meter represents the volume in a way our ears perceive it. Our ears are not as sensitive to peak volume levels that are described usually with decibels as they are to average volume levels or loudness that is described with units like LUFS, RMS, or as in our meter VU. Thus, it makes more sense to use such a meter to study the loudness. When I play an unprocessed kick drum, we will notice that the needle goes from -7 to -4 VU, giving us a dynamic range of around 3 VUs. The kick drum after processing has a dynamic range of only a single VU. Also, the lowest VU level the processed kick drum reaches is -3 VU, unlike in the unprocessed one, where the lowest average volume was equal to -7 VU. Regardless of whether I run this meter through my own kick sounds or through already mastered techno productions, we will come to the same conclusion. Reducing the dynamic range of a kick drum is a key towards getting a stronger sound. It's time to learn how to reduce the dynamic range in sounds. I will teach you two similar techniques that use two different audio effects. We will start with a simpler technique for which you need only a limiter. A limiter is a type of compressor that is capable of extreme dynamic range reduction and is merciless towards all the peaks in the sound. Imagine we are taking the unprocessed kick drum and applying Ableton's stock limiter. It comes with an adjustable ceiling or in other plugins the threshold parameter. It tells the limiter how loud is actually too loud. Whenever the volume of, in our case, the kick drum is louder than the ceiling, the limiter starts reducing the dynamic range of that kick by applying extreme compression. That compression is so large that it will not allow the sound to get above the ceiling once the limiter is fully engaged. One of the ways to describe the amount of compression applied is the compressor's ratio. For example, if we used a classic compressor effect and set the ratio to 2:1, the volume of the signal above the threshold would be 2 times quieter than before compression. But still, unlike with the limiter, the volume of the sound would pass the defined threshold. To not make the volume pass through the threshold ever again, we can only imagine how high that ratio should be. In most limiter effects, including the Ableton's one, the ratio is fixed and it's higher than at least 10 to 1. Well, in the digital domain, even an infinite to 1 ratio seems to be achievable. What if I had absolutely no clue about the limiter's ratio, but still I would like to describe the amount of compression applied? That moving orange bar is a gain reduction meter. It tells by how many decibels the limiter has brought down the volume of a signal. The lower we bring the ceiling, the larger the gain reduction is. Instead of moving the ceiling down towards the signal, I can also use the gain parameter to apply an input gain. To move the signal itself towards the ceiling. Both approaches give the same result. The ceiling meets the signal and the compression is applied. Before I launched the limiter, the peak volume of our kick drum was equal to 0 decibels. Now, when I use a limiter with current settings, I see that the peak volume has dropped to minus 16 decibels and the gain reduction meter shows around 16 decibels too. You can imagine how high is the ratio of this limiter. We are definitely sure that the compression is now applied. But to hear better what did the limiter do, it would be wise to bring the peak volume of a compressed kick to the same level as before compression. So I'm using an utility that boosts the volume by the same amount of decibels the gain reduction shows. Now when we compare both sounds, we can hear the kick drum after limiting sounds more flat. What about the dynamic range? Before compression, it was equal to around 4 VU. After using the limiter, it's equal to around 0.5 VU. The dynamic range is greatly reduced and we can both hear and see it. Besides using just ceiling and gain to control the sound, we can also use both look ahead and release parameters. The look ahead defines how fast does a limiter react to incoming peaks in the signal. Theoretically, we would say that shorter look ahead should make the sound even more flat. Let's see if that's true. Currently, the look ahead is set to 6 milliseconds and the dynamic range is equal to around 0.5 VU. I'm bringing down the look ahead to 1.5 milliseconds. And while the dynamic range, at least the dynamic range we observed through the meter, remains the same, we can see the average volume is even higher. And if we look at the waveforms, we can see that indeed, with shorter look ahead, more peaks are flattened. But what is more important is the difference in the sound itself. The kick drum with shorter look ahead sounds more crispy and distorted than the same kick with longer look ahead. That is because short look ahead introduces extra distortion that probably plays a part in bringing the average volume higher. Personally, I would treat the look ahead control only as a way to saturate or distort the sound without paying attention to its influence over the dynamic range. After all, the dynamic range is mainly adjusted with both ceiling and gain. The last control that affects the limiter is the release. It tells for how long the compression has to be applied once the signal falls below the threshold or ceiling. We can imagine that when the release is set to 0, the compressor stops engaging immediately when the kick drum is quiet enough. That setting gives the most aggressive compression, the largest average volume and, in theory, a smaller dynamic range. If we increase the release, the compressor will keep reducing the volume of the kick drum even when it is already quiet enough. This should result in a more natural compression with slightly larger dynamic range. We can observe that even in our kick sound that was already quite flat from the beginning due to the amount of distortion I added while making that sound. With the release set to 0 milliseconds, the dynamic range we see on the meter seems to be a bit smaller than with the release set to, for example, 50 milliseconds. By looking at the waveforms of both kick sounds, any difference is way less noticeable. The conclusion would be to use the release parameter as a way to fine-tune the limiter's behavior. Ableton's limiter also comes with the auto-release switch that makes the limiter adjust its release time automatically basing on the input signal and probably its transients. If you are starting out with compression, it's a good idea to begin tweaking the limiter with the auto switch turned on and right in the end, turn that switch off and play around with release on your own. Having now all the knowledge, we can understand how we managed to transform this weak kick sound into a stronger one. Unfortunately, limiters don't work that well with all kick sounds. The kick drum we were compressing a while ago is different from the remaining ones. Let's preview all the weak kick sounds again. Do you feel the difference in punch? The kick drum we were compressing a while ago is the only kick sound that gets its attack and punch from higher or mid frequencies only. It's not wrong at all or uncommon, it's just different. The kick drum from the burst track by Mercer is made in the exact same way. Remaining kick sounds feel much more punchy in lower frequencies area. To make that difference even more noticeable, I will use a low pass filter on the master channel so we can listen to only lower frequencies of each weak kick drum. The kick we compressed a while ago, unlike other kick sounds, doesn't have any punch in the low end. But why exactly a limiter wouldn't work well on remaining kick sounds? Let's add a limiter on the distorted kick sound and see what happens. Before using a limiter, we had a kick with punchy low end that made it sound aggressive. But once I turned the limiter on, the low end punch is gone. Let's use a low pass filter on master channel again to hear that better. This rumble kick drum will face the same consequences. Without the limiter we have lots of low end punch, but after the compression, that low end punch is gone. This will be even more audible with a low pass filter on the master channel turned on. The same thing would happen to the trance kick if we compress it that way. We can sum up these listening exercises with a very important conclusion. Reducing the dynamic range in a kick drum with a limiter that works with all frequencies makes the kick more powerful if that kick sound gets its power and punch from mid frequencies. If a kick drum gets its power and punch from low frequencies, a limiter will make it sound less strong, because the low end will be eaten. In other words, simpler words, we could say that for kick drums, compressing the mid frequencies is much better than compressing the low end. How to work with remaining kick sounds? The solution would be to use a compressor that works only with mid frequencies while ignoring the low ones. It's time to introduce a multiband compressor. Such compressor splits all the frequencies in the sound into three sections: the low end, mid end, and the high end. This is done in the split frequency section of the multiband dynamics effect. Then, to each section, a single compressor is attached. All the compression happens in the middle section of this effect. We can already find some similarities to the limiter we covered earlier. We can apply an input gain with the input knobs, and this is equivalent to the gain knob in Ableton's limiter. In the time setting step, we have release controls that were present in the limiter too. The remaining buttons and knobs fine-tune the overall multiband dynamics behavior. To get you quickly into multiband compression, I will work with the rumble kick sound. Because this is the type of a kick that needs only mid-frequencies compression to shine. I will start by turning off the high-end and low-end compressors, since we won't need to use them. A few controls got grayed out, and that immediately makes the effect look more friendly. I will apply an exaggerated amount of mid-frequencies compression, because in that way, adjusting all the remaining parameters, so the frequency split filters, attack and release, will be much easier. Let's make the mid-end compressor act like a limiter. I click the A button to jump into the downward compression settings. That is the type of compression a limiter usually applies. When the sound gets too loud, its volume is brought down. I will set the threshold. In the limiter effect it was called ceiling, to catch lots of mid-frequencies. And the ratio will be set to 20:1 to mimic a limiter. The gain reduction meter shows that the volume of mid-frequencies is brought down by around 16 decibels. Let's adjust the mid-compressor's output to the same value. We are ready to fine-tune the compressor now. The first thing I would do is to adjust the frequency split filters to tell the range of frequencies being compressed. I will start with the bottom filter. I will lower the frequency value to make the kick sound warmer. Depending on your taste, you can also increase that frequency value, but remember, do not adjust that control extremely. If I set this frequency control too low, I will start compressing the low end, making the kick less punchy. Too high value will make the kick unnecessarily too bright. It will be okay to go not far away from 100 Hz. Now onto the top filter that is slightly easier to adjust. The frequency goes up and the kick gets brighter. The frequency goes down and the sound gets darker. Find a sweet spot for yourself. Personally, I will not deviate far from the default setting. The filters are set up so we can move on to the second step, that is time-related settings. To access them, we jump into the T section to adjust both attack and release. I will start with the release. That works in the exact same way as in the limiter. The theory behind the release control is already covered, so now I will tell you something more practical. Simply said, increasing the release is going to make the kick drum tail quieter because the compression is applied for a longer period. Shorter release pushes the mid-frequencies and the kick drum tail up front because the compression becomes more aggressive. Very short release settings, similarly as short look-ahead value in the limiter, will introduce extra saturation that can fatten the sound. I want to cover a bit the mid-end, so I will increase the default release time by a bit. In most scenarios, the attack is your punch control. Longer attack values will make the kick more punchy because the compressor will not react immediately, passing through some mid-frequencies with no volume reduction. Short attack values will make the kick sound weaker because the mid-frequencies are brought down immediately. I feel that my kick doesn't need lots of extra punch, so something around 50 milliseconds will be fine. The only thing remaining is to set the amount of gain reduction that is controlled with both threshold and release. But to do that, we want to know first how the compressor has changed the sound so far. We have to compensate the difference in volume before and after compression. Because compressors and limiters usually reduce the volume of any peaks in the sound, I personally find it more intuitive to use a VU meter for such compensation. I turn off the mid-frequencies compressor and attach a VU meter after the multiband dynamics. The mid-frequencies are soloed and we can measure their loudness. The loudness is almost equal to 3.8 VU, so now I turn on the mid compressor and use the output knob to bring the loudness to the same level. I can unsolo the mid frequencies now and compare the sound with and without compression by turning on and off the mid compressor. I think the kick is too punchy now, so I would like to reduce the amount of gain reduction. If you have been studying this video carefully, you might ask yourself a following question. If both threshold and ratio affect the amount of gain reduction applied, what is better? To set both threshold and ratio low, or to set both threshold and ratio high? Let's test it out. In theory, if our goal of compression is to glue either a group of sounds or a range of frequencies together, it's better to set both threshold and ratio low, because low threshold engulfs a larger part of the signal. Following that principle, I have prepared another multiband compressor that works with the same mid frequencies. Here, we can see the ratio is nearly equal to 2 to 1, and to apply enough gain reduction, I had to bring down the threshold by a lot. This is quite opposite to the compression settings we have set a while ago. Here, the same amount of gain reduction is achieved by using a much higher ratio and threshold. Both compressors apply the same amount of compression, and the volume levels have been already compensated. Let's listen to the kick and compare the differences between these two settings. It seems like the theory I brought up a while ago makes some sense. The kick seems more punchy and glued when both threshold and ratio are low. In the end, these are the final settings of a multiband compressor to process the rumble kick. I said I wanted my kick to be less punchy, so instead of bringing the threshold higher, I applied the theory from a while ago and lowered the ratio to keep the kick drum glued. Volume levels are compensated, so let's see how does the kick sound like with and without the compression. And, unlike the limiter, a multiband compressor kept the low-end dynamics while making the kick punchier. Let's quickly examine more advanced multiband compression examples to see what possibilities compressing other frequency ranges give. A distorted kick drum has, in my opinion, too dynamic low end. I want the low frequencies to pop out less, so I apply some downward compression to them. To make the kick sound more flat, I squash the mid frequencies. To remove higher frequencies, but only from the kick drum tail, instead of an equalizer, I should use a high-end compressor. A Schranz kick drum definitely needs more punch and presence in the high and mid frequencies. The low end dynamics is already fine, so I begin with controlling the mid frequencies that are very important to this kick sound. A mid compressor makes the kick punchier and more prominent. The high-end compressor will brighten up the sound.